tensile strength of this. Physically, this is strong enough to do it, but it's just what an audience understands is.
I think an audience looks at that and thinks string.
Yeah. But the tensile strength of that is.
Yeah, I could kill someone with that.
Oh yeah. Don't even need a string, mate. So tonight is essentially what we call a blocking run. So the last 5 weeks we've been working with the actors piece by piece and essentially working out where characters exist on stage at any time. And the practicalities of it are they're essentially making sure that like eye lines are kind of like being like kept at all times so that people aren't stood in front of people so the audience can see them. But it's also about like conferring power, conferring ideas. It's one of the director's tools in terms of kind of like what they can actually do overtly. That if you place people downstage or upstage, it kind of confers different levels of power. And so we've got this skeleton of an idea now, and the cast have all been sort of noting it down, and I've got like essentially a spreadsheet with all the moves blocked in. There's about 512 of them. But what we're doing now is we're taking chunks, so like page 1 up to page 23, and we're just working on that blocking and having a think about it and seeing what it feels and seeing if that now that we've been doing this for 4 weeks and characters maybe like changed, if stuff needs to change, if like we need to think about ideas, if the addition of props is changing things. And so it's really one of the more experimental parts of the process where we really are kind of just pulling and playing around with stuff. And one of the really nice things is that now that actors are so confident in their characters, they're kind of pushing back on ideas and they're like workshopping ideas with me. If you're off stage and you see something that's interesting and you want to experiment with an idea, come and talk to me. I will note it down. And then when we run through, when I feed back to the actors who are on stage, I'll like talk through those notes. When the actors are on stage, I don't want anyone talking to them. I kind of want people just to run with their own flow. But what I'm going to do is we're going to have a system where I have like, let's say I write down 5 notes, I stop you, right? So what that should mean is that you get like 2 or 3 minutes to run with things. Then we can stop, we can go through 5 notes, which should in theory be quite easy to get through. Because we're an amateur group, we kind of have to deal with circumstances as they are. And so today we just didn't have access to Lizzie, who plays Brandon. So my assistant director was on stage kind of subbing in. I think the phrase I always like to use is fake shemping, which kind of, it's just like someone kind of being like that character and just essentially doing the movements so that people get a sense of where they are in space. In theory, you can do blocking without people in that space, but just the physicality of a body really does help quite a lot in terms of making people think about what they're doing.
Can I have some soda?
Sorry.
Yes. Thank you ever so much. Well, as a matter of fact, I'm here on an errand.
An errand?
I want some rope.
Rope?
Yes. Why so excited? Rope. The young people in the other room, having exhausted the lyric possibilities of the gramophone, are now projecting their entire youthful elan and ingenuity into the composition of a parcel.
Have you got the key?
Yes, I've got the key. It's in my waistcoat pocket.
Well, hand it over and let's have a look inside.
I'm hanged if I do.
But why not, my dear? If you're really innocent, you can prove it, dear.
So she would probably, if she did see that social switch, she would stop being me or Brandon, and she would switch to intellectual Brandon. Which is, she'd make up a lie, she'd say, oh, I'm sorry, the chest is actually kind of like sealed, or I don't have the key, or kind of like, we've locked it because kind of like there's moths in there or something. She'd kind of like come up, she'd switch her tone from being kind of like that, like little jokey kind of, to kind of like being that Brandon. We're kind of talking about how do you play a character who's a psychopath, but also make them an interesting kind of version of themselves, make them interesting for an audience and make it so that essentially there's more tonality. And we came up with the idea of Brandon having specific masks that she uses as a way of essentially kind of working around people. That's a seizure social animal. Rope isn't just the rope of the weapon that's used to kill Ronald. It's not just the thing that's going to hang Brandon and Granillo. The rope is those social ropes that Brandon uses against people. So she's tying you and Raglan and Johnston and Debenham down with etiquette. And so she's still in this playful mood, and if she was smart, she would have stopped being that playful person and would have probably pushed those social triggers with you more. But she's gone to the swing of that now, and she hasn't switched those masks properly. But that brinksmanship is kind of failing her, and she doesn't realise it's failing her, because as astute and as smart as Brandon is, she's also kind of like a socially malnourished 21-year-old who's essentially kind of riding high on this idea of what she's done, and so she's giddy and she's impractical, and there is that little moment where, and I think this is also the pivot point from Layla as being kind of like quite a frothy character to essentially being the more stern, kind of like more serious character, which you then carry through to your confrontation with Cadell.
It might be worth trying the whole thing as we just did it, but then the second that moment, that twig happens, you go up 2 or maybe even 3 tension stages, and then just like, even if that's too much, just see what that's like and what that communicates.
Yeah, just exaggerating it to see.
Yeah.
It is locked, isn't it? And why a padlock? What have you got in it?
But you know, Layla, you've already explained to us what it is.
No. I honestly think you ought to let us have a look. Have you got the key?
Yes, I've got the key. It's in my waistcoat pocket.
Well, hand it over and let's have a look inside.
I'm hanged if I do.
But why not, my dear? If you're really innocent, you can prove it, my dear.
I think that kind of thing of her hurting a finger, it can kind of almost be that little reset point for her where she's like, hurts a finger and is like, exhale.
Okay.
And then just be like, okay.
Yeah.
My hands are red with a crime committed just less than 3 hours ago.
Well, if you won't, then you won't. All the same, if I had some strong men about me, they'd force it from you.
I see Raglan as a puppy dog to Layla, if you know what I mean. And so, you know, you've been running back and forward. Yeah. And it's sort of like, I just think that each of the moves when she asks you to do something could be quite a bit fast. You know, you're excited, and sort of gives you a bit of a contrast to everybody else as well.
People think of the Great War as this meat grinder, and it's a sort of understood that like it was a bad thing, but in 1929, it's still this chivalric last hurrah of kind of like the British Empire kind of thing that we went over there and we kind of like kicked their asses, and it's that kind of thing of, and so him being so despondent and so being like,
I think that's pissed Raglan off.
Yeah, and so I think there is that element of like Raglan doesn't quite know what to do with that, but he's got a lot of feelings that he's trying to like deal with there, and I think it kind of dredges something up there. So I think you can play this as being quite disgusted.
Being able to fool around my gramophone with you two, I have to hobble about like an old man on one leg. But the point is that I have proved that I don't disapprove of murder. Haven't I?
When he does the "I'm an old man hobbling around" line and then kind of like sinks down, it's kind of almost when you would approach him like a dog. Like he's essentially like it's a feral, angry dog, but it's kind of whimpering, and you're kind of almost moving to kind of reassure, and that's his presence kind of triggers him feeling your presence is what triggers his little butt.
You do something I should very much like to have done. I have to hobble about like an old man on one leg. But I have proved that I do not disapprove of murder. Haven't I?